Let's do a series of practice problems now. For each of these problems, I want you to literally draw the cups that we talked about. Then I want you to rewrite the fractions in terms of the least common denominator. Okay, and then evaluate, which means get the answer. Okay, so the first problem we want to look at is the fraction 5/6 plus 1/4. So pause the video and see if you can work it out. Okay, so let us draw two cups. And the first one needs to be divided into 6. Now that's a little tricky, so let's mark it at the halfway point and then divide each of those into thirds. And you'll see I have 6 marks here. So I have now filled up to the 5th mark, and I have fluid up to the 5th mark, and I don't have anything in the top 6th. Now to make a 4th, I'll divide in half and half again, and then that means there are 2/4 up there, and we have that much liquid in the bottom, so we're filling in. But you'll see there are all of these, there are 3/4 at the top that aren't filled in. Now clearly the 1/4 that's filled in here is bigger than the missing 1/6 at the top. 1/4 is bigger than 1/6. So if we pour the water from one cup into the other, we're clearly, let's combine them down here, going to get a cup and a little. So we'll fill this one up, and we're going to have a little bit on the bottom. So our answer, like before, should be a little bigger than 1. A little more than 1. Okay, so now let's figure out what the least common denominator is and rewrite the fraction. So coming up here, if I start looking at multiples of 6, I could write out that I get 6, 12, 18. If I take the 4 that's in the denominator of 1/4 and start writing them out, the multiples, I get 4, 8, 12. We can stop right there. We don't need to go any further. We now know that the second multiple of 6 is 12, and the third multiple of 4 is 12. That's going to tell us exactly what to do. So we need to take 5/6 and multiply it by 2/2, which once again is the multiplicative identity. Plus, we need to take 1/4, and we're going to have to multiply that by 3/3. So let's come down a line. If we multiply 5 times 2, we get 10. 6 times 2, we get 12. So 10/12 is the same proportion as 5/6. In other words, if I'd gone over to the cups and divided every mark halfway, each one of those would be a 12th. And instead of having 5 of the 6th filled up, we would have 10 of the 12ths filled up. Using the same method, we can take 3 times 1 and get 3, and 4 times 3 is 12. So 1/4 and 3/12 is the same thing. In other words, if we had taken each of the 4s and broken it into 3 parts, notice the 3 over the 3. So if we had taken each 4th and broken it into 3 parts, we would end up with 12 parts, and we would have 3 of those filled. So 3/12 is the same value. Okay, so let's keep on going. Now we have similar things. We have 10/12. Actually, let me continue downward. 10/12, and we have 3/12. and that should give us 13 1/12. Mathematicians usually would skip that line and write it as 10/12 plus 3/12 equals 13/12. If we write that as a mixed number, it's 1 and 1/12, or you could think of that as 1 plus 1/12. And you can see that's 1 and a little more. So we can be pretty convinced without doing any further work that that's probably the correct answer. Let's do a second problem now. Okay, let's take the same two fractions, but let's do a subtraction out of it. Let's turn it into a subtraction problem. So 5/6 minus 1/4. Just now pause the video and see if you can work this one out. Okay, let me draw the cups again. So 5/6, just like before, is almost full. Now what we're going to do though is if we take our second cup, we're not adding a quarter, we're going to take a quarter away. So how big is a quarter? Well, a quarter is about this much, from there to about there. But this time let's take it off of the top. So we're going to take a quarter of it away. So this part is gone, and what's left is that much fluid after we take a quarter of the fluid away. Quarter of a cup away, I should say, rather than a quarter of the fluid. So we started with 5/6 and we take 1/4 of a cup away. We had 5/6 cups and we take a quarter cup away. So you can see the answer. I'm suspicious. It looks like it's getting close to the halfway point. So when I get an answer, if it's close to 1/2, I'll probably conclude that I probably have the right answer. Now, given that we found the common denominator in the last problem, we can reuse the work, and we know that 5/6 is the same as 10/12, and we know that 1/4 is the same as 3/12. And so let's go ahead, and if I had 10/12 and I take away 3 of them, I should end up with 7/12. Now remember, it looked like we had maybe a little bit more than half. What would 1/2 be? Well, 1/2, if we use the multiplicative identity, if we want to make that into 12ths, would be 6 of them. So 6 out of 12 is the same as 1 out of 2. So our answer of 7/12 looks just a little bit bigger than 6/12, and so I'm pretty happy about that. My answer corresponds to what I would expect. Let's try one final problem. Let's do the following. We're going to throw a mixed number at you. 2 2/3 plus 7/9. So let me give you a hint on this one. You want to think of 2 2/3 as 2 plus 2/3, as we had talked about before. Okay, so here we go. We're going to draw it out since we have a lot. We're going to draw a lot of cups. Okay, we have to get 3 cups out to represent the 2 2/3, and we're going to add that to, we're going to add 7/9 to that. So let's fill these up. The top first one, totally full. Second one, totally full. The third one, though, we have to break it into thirds. It's only full up to there. And the last one, if we're going to break it into ninths, so that's a little tricky. Let's break it into thirds, and then each of the thirds will get subdivided. And we've got to get to 7 of those. So 7/9 would be about there. Okay, so let's think about this before we start trying to do any work. First of all, we're going to leave the 2 cups if we start adding things together. These 2 cups can just stay the way they are. Let's pour this cup into that cup, and clearly we can fill it up, and we're going to have a bit left over. So when we combine everything, we're going to have our 2 original cups that were totally full. That third cup is going to fill up, and then we're going to have a little bit less in our fourth cup because we poured some of it over. So I'm going to estimate, just eyeball it. It looks like we're going to have somewhere around there in the last cup. Okay, so somewhere probably around the halfway point again. So it looks like our answer should be about 3 full cups plus maybe a half. Let's work through this. So first of all, we have a couple of options. We could take 2 2/3 and make it into a rational number. Okay, so 2 2/3, how many thirds would that be? That would be, let's see, we would have 6 thirds is 2, so we would have 8 thirds plus 7 ninths. Now we need to find the least common denominator. Okay, so it turns out since 3 can be 3, 6, 9, the third multiple of 3 is 9, so we can leave the 7 ninths alone, but the 8 thirds we can adjust by realizing that we want the third multiple of 3. So here's what we can do. We can take 8 thirds times 3 over 3 plus 7 ninths. So 8 times 3 is 24 over 3 times 3 plus 7 ninths. So if I have 24 ninths and I add 7 more ninths, I should end up with 31 ninths. Now doing the division, 9 goes into there 3 times. And how many are going to be left over? We'll have 4 ninths left over. And 4 ninths is pretty close to 1/2. So once again, my answer corresponds pretty nicely. If I write it as a mixed number, it corresponds pretty nicely with what I saw when I combined the cups.